So you can understand even more so why he would want to step away and not focus on fighting or defending his title, because obviously there's a lot going on. It's extremely sad.
So here's what just went down. Moments ago, the entire mixed martial arts world got completely shaken to its core when news broke that Ilia Topuria, this undefeated two-division champion who's been totally unstoppable, has officially stepped away from defending his UFC lightweight title. This isn't just some minor announcement. This is absolutely massive.
News regarding Ilia Topuria, because I do think that as of this morning, it's probably the biggest news of the day. So obviously by now you know that he is not fighting on January 24th.
And here's the thing. The announcement itself is shocking enough, but when you dig into the real reason behind his decision, the actual truth of what's happening behind closed doors, it's going to leave you speechless. This is heavy stuff. So let's break down everything that's happening here, because this story has layers that just keep getting more intense. The shocking announcement that nobody saw coming. What I'm about to share with you today is nothing short of seismic in the world of mixed martial arts. And that's not an exaggeration. We are witnessing, in real time right now, one of the most dramatic and genuinely heartbreaking downfalls of a reigning champion that the UFC has ever seen in its entire history. This is unprecedented territory. Before we dive deep into the absolute chaos that is currently unfolding, before we get into all the crazy details, let me take you back to where this whole situation began to unravel. Because understanding the timeline here is critical. This whole thing started as whispers and rumors floating around the MMA community. You know how it goes, but those whispers have now exploded into one of the most shocking and talked about stories in recent UFC history. This is without question the biggest story in MMA right now. And Ariel Helwani himself, who's basically the top journalist in this sport, acknowledged as much when discussing the situation on his show. When Helwani says something is big, you better believe it's actually big.
For the past several weeks, I've made the difficult decision to temporarily step away from defending my title. This was not a decision I took lightly. However, when circumstances arise that threaten your personal integrity, your family, and your reputation, there comes a point when you must address them directly. In recent months, I have been subjected to severe and unacceptable pressure, including threats to disseminate false allegations of domestic abuse unless financial demands were met. These allegations are entirely unfounded. The truth is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of evidence.
On November 27, 2025, Ilia Topuria took to social media with a post that immediately sent shockwaves rippling through the entire MMA community. And I mean everyone was talking about this within minutes. In that initial announcement, Topuria stated plainly, without any elaborate explanation at the time, "I won't be fighting in the first quarter of next year. I'm going through a difficult moment in my personal life. I want to focus on my children and resolve this situation as soon as possible." At the time when that first announcement dropped, nobody knew the full extent of what was actually happening behind closed doors, what was really going on in his personal life. The MMA world was left to speculate, and speculate they did, because that's what happens when you leave information gaps in a story this big. Some people thought it was simply the immense pressures of being a two-division champion catching up with him, which would be understandable given the insane demands of holding two belts. Other people wondered if there were contract disputes with the UFC, maybe some kind of financial disagreement or promotional issues. But the truth, as we would soon discover in the weeks that followed, was far more serious and far more heartbreaking than anyone had anticipated or could have imagined. The support from his fellow fighters was immediate and heartfelt, which shows you the respect Topuria has earned in this sport. Max Holloway, one of the men that Topuria had spectacularly knocked out during his historic featherweight reign, reached out publicly with a message that really hit different. He said, "Sorry to hear, champ, if it's what I'm hearing. It is, I know the struggle firsthand trying to protect your kids. Hope all goes well." That message from Holloway was telling. It was revealing in a way that made people sit up and pay attention, because those specific words, trying to protect your kids, hinted at something much deeper, something more profound than a simple training break or injury recovery, or any of the usual reasons fighters step away. And then on December 15, 2025, everything changed. The whole story exploded. Ilia Topuria released a statement that would expose the true nature of his absence, pulling back the curtain on what was really happening. Ariel Helwani read through the entire statement on his show, and I think it's worth hearing exactly what Topuria had to say. word for word, because the details here are crucial to understanding what this man is going through.
So that's heavy duty stuff. Obviously, we knew that he was going through some personal issues and there's rumors online, and I didn't want to partake in any of those. I had not heard any of this. I had not heard any of these allegations or rumors, innuendo, any of that. And so you can understand even more so why he would want to step away and not focus on fighting or defending his title, because obviously there's a lot going on. It's extremely sad. It's, I feel for everyone involved. I feel for his family. I feel for his kids. It's an awful situation.
Let me break down exactly what Topuria is alleging here, because this is critical to understanding the true magnitude of this situation. And I mean, we're talking serious life-altering allegation. According to his official statement that he released, Topuria claims he has been the victim of an attempted extortion scheme, and this isn't some minor shakedown we're talking about. Someone has allegedly threatened to spread false allegations of domestic abuse against him unless he complied with substantial financial demands, basically trying to destroy his reputation and career unless he paid up. The timing of this revelation coincides directly with Topuria's ongoing separation and custody battle involving his ex-wife Georgina Uzketegay Bedel, who is the mother of his young daughter that was born. In multiple reports from various sources indicate that their relationship deteriorated rapidly in late 2025, and the signs of this deterioration were marked by mutual unfollows on social media, which is always a telltale sign. Something's wrong. Removal of shared photos from both of their accounts, in what Spanish media has described as a contentious and heated divorce involving significant assets and complicated child custody arrangements. When you hear about everything that Topuria is dealing with right now, all the layers of legal battles and personal attacks and custody fights, you begin to understand why stepping away from fighting was his only option, really his only choice. If he wanted to protect his family, and Helwani summed up the gravity of the situation perfectly when he discussed it on his show, really capturing just how serious this whole thing has become.
To remain silent was made solely to protect my children, who are the most important part of my life. However, I've come to understand that silence under these circumstances does not protect the truth. It allows false narratives to take hold. Many individuals have faced similar situations, and time and again, the legal system has ultimately clarified the facts. Today, I'm stepping forward not only for my family and myself, but also to demonstrate that no one should be forced to yield.
According to the research and timeline that's been pieced together from various sources, the couple's separation began showing public signs around October 6, 2025, when Topuria and Georgina deleted joint photos from their Instagram accounts, which was the first red flag that something was seriously wrong. Just 1 week later, Georgina posted a cryptic message on her Instagram that really seemed to be directed at the situation she was in. She wrote, "A mother's true superpower is not being alert to danger. It's building a world where her daughter can grow up brave, free, and unafraid." That post got a lot of attention, and people started reading between the lines, trying to figure out what was really going on. By November 10th, reports surfaced that Georgina had filed for divorce, and these weren't just rumors anymore. This was official legal action being taken. The allegations that she was pursuing 50% of Topuria's assets, which, given his success as a two-division champion, we're talking about substantial money here. 2 days after that, on November 12th, infidelity allegations surfaced, and things got even messier, with Georgina reportedly telling Spanish media outlets that the breakup was due to Topuria messaging other women, which obviously added another layer of drama to an already complicated situation. But here's where it gets even more complicated, and this is where Topuria really started fighting back. In his December 15th statement, the one that revealed everything, Topuria revealed that he has been proactively gathering evidence to defend himself against these allegations. But he wasn't just sitting back and taking these accusations. He stated that all relevant evidence has been carefully preserved and documented. And we're talking about a serious evidence collection operation here, including audio recordings, written communications, witness statements, and video material. This documentation, he claims, has already been submitted to judicial authorities in Spain to pursue formal charges for attempted extortion, falsification of evidence, misappropriation of funds and personal property, and multiple threats. This is serious legal territory we're talking about now. Topuria's statement also explained why he initially chose to stay silent about the entire ordeal. why he didn't immediately come forward with all these details, and why he ultimately decided to speak out publicly when he did.
Well, I got something for you. It's called the Wife Beater Special. That's right. I got my wife beater on for Ilia Topuria. That puts his hands on a woman. You know, I grew up without a dad. You know, never seen my dad, never will see my dad. And you know what? I'd rather not see my dad than have my dad there beating on my mom. Let me tell you something, that'll get you killed around these parts, son.
The reactions to this bombshell have been swift and divided across the MMA community and social media, with people really taking strong positions on both sides. Some in the MMA community have rallied to support Topuria, viewing him as a victim standing against blackmail and extortion, someone who's being unfairly targeted and deserves our support through this difficult time. Others remain skeptical, questioning the timing of his announcement amid the divorce proceedings, wondering if this is some kind of strategic move in the legal battle rather than the full truth. One fighter who wasted no time weighing in, who just immediately jumped into the fray, was Bryce Mitchell, who immediately took Topuria's ex-wife's side and launched into a scathing attack on social media that got a lot of people talking.
I think a lot of people were surprised that you were not fighting in the first quarter, at least. But how is it with the UFC? Are they understanding? Because obviously all the fighters can go through problems such as what you are going through. How understanding was Hunter and the other people involved? The truth is, Ilia says they have been excellent. We have a special connection. I have understanding without having to give a lot of explanation, understanding from them. From the very first moment, they have extended their hand. I have been offered their support in any time I needed it. So I don't really know. I'm very happy for the support I've received from them.
Mitchell even went so far as to call out Topuria's brother, Alejandro Topuria, for a fight, saying he'd be willing to step into the octagon with him at featherweight, which is a whole different level of getting involved in someone else's drama. But while fighters like Bryce Mitchell are busy passing judgment on social media and inserting themselves into the situation, the UFC has a business to run, and more importantly, they have a lightweight division that's now in complete disarray without its champion. So how exactly is the promotion handling this unprecedented situation? What's their game plan for moving forward? The UFC's response and the interim title situation. The UFC, to their credit, has handled this situation with what Topuria himself describes as remarkable support, and that's actually pretty significant praise coming from a fighter going through something this difficult. When asked about how the organization was treating him during this difficult time, when reporters pressed him on whether the UFC was being understanding or putting pressure on him, Topuria had nothing but praise for how Hunter Campbell and the rest of the UFC brass have treated him through this ordeal. You do wonder about the timeline here.
Point will they decide to make that interim belt the actual belt if he's not going to come back anytime soon? I don't think that they're going to be forced to do that for the January event. We'll see what kind of timeline he's on, how long this is going to play out. But if it's by next summer, perhaps they make that call.
But here's the critical question that everyone in the MMA world is asking. The question that affects the entire division and all the contenders waiting for their shot. What happens to the lightweight title while Topuria deals with these personal and legal matters? What's the plan for keeping the division moving forward? The answer came swiftly from the UFC brass, and it was decisive. The UFC announced an interim lightweight title bout between Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett at UFC 3041, scheduled for January 24, 2026 at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, which is one of their biggest venues. This decision has sent shockwaves through the division and sparked intense debate among fighters and fans alike, because not everyone agrees with this matchup. Let me give you the full context of why this matchup is so controversial, why people are so divided on this decision. Justin Gaethje is a 37-year-old veteran with a professional record of 25 wins and 5 losses, a guy who's been around the block and fought everyone. He's a former interim lightweight champion who captured that honor back in 2020 against Tony Ferguson before losing the unification bout to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Known for his aggressive fan-favorite style that emphasizes power punching and resilience, Gaethje has been involved in some of the most thrilling and memorable fights in recent UFC history. The kind of fights that people talk about for years. On the other side, Paddy Pimblett is a 30-year-old from Liverpool with a 21-3 record, remaining undefeated in the UFC with 6 consecutive victories, which is an impressive streak by any measure. His charismatic personality, combined with his grappling skills and improving striking, has made him one of the most polarizing figures in the sport, someone people either love or hate, with very little in between. But here's where the controversy really heats up, where people start getting really upset about this decision. Armen Tsarukyan, the consensus #1 contender, with dominant wins including over Charles Oliveira, and a recent submission of Dan Hooker, was completely bypassed for this interim title shot. Just totally skipped over, despite clearly being next in line, and he is not happy about it, not happy at all. Tsarukyan has been vocal about his frustration, claiming that the interim booking was part of a premeditated plan to elevate Pimblett for a grudge match with Topuria, that this is more about creating drama and selling pay-per-views than actually respecting ranking. He stated publicly they want to make a star out of Paddy Pimblett. They know I could beat everybody, and that's a bold claim, but one that many people actually agree with based on his recent performances. And here's where things get even more interesting, even more complex. Pimblett himself has been warning publicly that Topuria could be forced to vacate the title entirely if his absence extends into summer 20. Helwani addressed this possibility directly on his show, speculating about when the UFC might be forced to make that call and strip Topuria of the belt.
So basically, Topuria says, I'm going to spoil the UFC's plans, which Justin Gaethje has acknowledged the fact the UFC clearly wants Topuria versus Paddy. And Topuria basically says, oh, well, I'm probably not fighting Justin Gaethje if he wins. Like, look at that. If Justin Gaethje wins, the subtitles are kind of covered up here. The UFC has different plans. Watch that again. Watch that again. I know most of you don't speak Spanish. But if Justin Gaethje wins, the UFC has different plans.
This is crucial to understand the timeline we're working with here. Topuria's last fight was the title-winning bout against Charles Oliveira at UFC 317 in June 2025, which was a spectacular performance. A return by summer 2026 would mark roughly a one-year absence from active competition. According to UFC's informal guidelines, and these aren't written in stone, but they're generally followed, champions are typically expected to defend their titles at least once every 12 to 18 months, or risk being stripped of their championship. But what's even more fascinating is what Topuria himself has hinted at regarding his future plans, what he's been saying about what comes next for him. According to reports from multiple sources, Topuria has suggested that if Gaethje wins the interim title, he might actually vacate voluntarily and pursue a welterweight challenge against Islam Makhachev. Instead of unifying the lightweight belts, which would be a shocking move. One YouTube commentator broke down exactly what Topuria said about the UFC having different plans if Gaethje wins, really digging into the implications of these comments.
Did he vacate the belt, or did you guys say, if you're moving to lightweight, then we don't want to hold up the featherweight division?
No, he did that. He said, I've done everything I can do here. I'm ready to move up. And he vacated it. He said, I shouldn't be holding up anybody's opportunities. And, you know, it's always, I respect when guys do that.
This revelation has led many to believe that Topuria's primary interest is fighting Pimblett, not necessarily the most deserving contender based on rankings and recent performances. The rivalry between Topuria and Pimblett dates back to their heated exchange at UFC 317, where Topuria shoved Pimblett during an in-octagon confrontation after knocking out Oliveira, which created this intense bad blood between them. Now let me give you the historical context for how the UFC typically handles these situations, because there's actually precedent for what happens when champions are inactive. When Conor McGregor became the first simultaneous two-division champion in November 2016, which was a huge moment in UFC history, he was stripped of his featherweight title just 1 month later when he showed no intention of defending it. When it became clear he wasn't going to fight at 45 pounds again, his lightweight title lasted longer until April 2018, when after over 500 days of inactivity, the UFC stripped him and crowned Khabib Nurmagomedov as the undisputed champion, which led to one of the biggest fights in UFC history, when Conor eventually came back. This brings us to an important point about Topuria's history with title vacancies, because this isn't actually his first time giving up a belt. Back when he vacated his featherweight title in February 2025, Dana White explained that it was entirely Topuria's decision and not something the UFC forced upon him, that Topuria made the choice himself.
Topuria has felt like he's done all that he can in that division, and he feels like he's cemented his legacy, and his body cannot make the weight anymore. So Topuria will be moving up to 155 pounds and will be vacating the featherweight title.
In February 2025, Topuria voluntarily vacated his featherweight title to pursue the lightweight championship, making the move up in weight officially. At the time, he cited the brutal weight cuts as his primary reason for moving up, explaining that walking around at approximately 80 to 90 pounds made cutting down to 145 increasingly unsustainable and honestly dangerous for his health. One analyst summed up the situation concisely when discussing why Topuria made the move up in weight. He won the vacant lightweight title at UFC 317 on June 28, 2025, knocking out Charles Oliveira in the very first round in what was a spectacular performance that had everyone talking. That victory made him the 10th fighter in UFC history to hold championships in 2 separate weight classes, which is an incredibly elite achievement, and the first unbeaten fighter to achieve 2 division champion status while maintaining a perfect record. But now, with Topuria sidelined indefinitely and an interim title fight on the horizon for January, the question everyone is asking is whether the lightweight champion will ever return to defend his belt, whether we will ever see him fight at 55 if he has bigger plans that could take him away from MMA altogether, perhaps into boxing, something else entirely.
But this is the most damning part. Don't be surprised if Topuria says goodbye to MMA. I don't think I'll stay in MMA too long. It's no secret I always wanted to go and test my skills in boxing. I wanted to finish my story in MMA first. I'll make my transition to boxing, and I'm going to surprise a lot of people. I mean, we kind of knew this. Topuria's been talking about this forever. He's been saying, I'm taking the Conor McGregor route.
Now we need to address the elephant in the room, the question that's on everyone's mind. What does the future hold for Ilia Topuria, and will we ever see him fight again in the octagon? The answer to that question is more complicated than you might think, because there are so many variables at play. Here, because based on recent interviews and statements that Topuria has given to various media outlets, Topuria has made it abundantly clear that his time in MMA is limited, that he's not planning to fight forever like some champions do. In fact, he's openly stated that he wants to transition to professional boxing sooner rather than later, that he sees his future in the squared circle rather than the octagon.
Ilia Topuria is saying that he wants to go into boxing and just completely be done with MMA soon. Yeah, that's a little bit worrying. First of all, Ilia is not going to be a world-level championship boxer. I hate to break it to you. I know I'm an MMA fan, but at the end of the day, boxers are so good at what they do because they master the sweet spot science. They master the sport of boxing. They spend their entire lives just boxing, whereas Ilia boxes, kicks, wrestles, does jiu-jitsu, elbows, knees. There is so much that goes into MMA that you don't have the time to focus on just one martial art.
Let me break down exactly what Topuria's long-term plans appear to be based on everything he said publicly. Following his lightweight title capture at UFC 317, immediately after winning that belt, Topuria immediately began lobbying for a super fight with Islam Makhachev, who had just vacated the lightweight belt to move up to welterweight, which would be a massive fight. Topuria framed this potential matchup as a legacy-defining triple crown, a chance at achievement, becoming the first fighter in UFC history to win titles in 3 weight classes, which would put him in a category all by himself. When Makhachev successfully claimed the welterweight title in November 2025 with a dominant decision over Jack Della Maddalena at UFC 322, proving he could compete at 70 pounds, Topuria escalated his callouts publicly, criticizing the performance as boring and lacking emotion, while confidently predicting he would put Makhachev to sleep, which is the kind of bold trash talk that sells fights. But parallel to these MMA aspirations running alongside his plans in mixed martial arts, Topuria has increasingly emphasized a looming exit from the sport to pursue boxing, talking more and more about stepping into the ring. In a December 2025 interview with Marca, a major Spanish publication, he stated plainly that his MMA career would not last too long, explaining a philosophy of not chasing 2 rabbits at once, meaning he intends to fully conclude his UFC story before dedicating himself exclusively to boxing, which is a smart approach if you think about it. Now, not everyone believes this boxing transition will be successful. Not everyone thinks he can just walk into professional boxing and dominate. One analyst was blunt about the challenges Topuria would face trying to compete at the highest levels of professional boxing against guys who have been boxing their entire lives.
He has openly said, I plan to retire between the ages of 30 and 32. I want my first defense to be October or November. It ended up being October. and he wants to retire between the age of 30-32. So essentially, he's already 29. He only plans on fighting Paddy if Paddy beats Justin Gaethje. Best case scenario, he fights Paddy in maybe July, I would say. That'd be the best case scenario. So now he's halfway to 30, and he says he wants to retire around 30, 32. Well, does that include boxing?
The implications of Topuria's boxing ambitions are staggering when you really think about the timeline here. Topuria has openly stated that he plans to retire between the ages of 30 and 32, which is relatively young for combat sports. He's currently 28 years old, turning 29 in a couple of weeks, which means we're already approaching the end of his planned career. If you do the math, and this is sobering when you calculate it, that means we might only have 2 or 3 more fights from Topuria at most before he walks away from the octagon forever, before we never see him compete in MMA again. One commentator laid out the brutal reality of this timeline when discussing Topuria's future on their show.
That you'll fight in January. When would you like to fight? When you feel it's time to return? Well, Ilia says, as I've communicated, I'm going through some personal problems. I do not have an exact date when everything will be fixed. I hope that as soon as possible, as soon as it is solved, I will be ready to go back. In the octagon, I prioritize at this time the welfare of my family, of my children, my own. So as soon as everything is solved, I will be back to the octagon.
Now let's talk about what this means for Topuria's legacy and the lightweight division's stability going forward. As of late November 2025, before all this chaos started, Topuria held the number 2 spot in the UFC men's pound-for-pound rankings, trailing only welterweight champion Islam Makhachev at number 1. He briefly held the number 1 position after his spectacular knockout of Oliveira at UFC 317, which was seen as one of the greatest performances of the year. His legacy as the 10th 2-division champion, with a perfect 17-0 record and spectacular knockouts over Volkanovski, Holloway, and Oliveira, remains elite top-tier achievements. However, having 0 lightweight defenses invites paper champ criticisms, potentially tarnishing his reign compared to multi-defense greats like Khabib or Charles Oliveira, who defended multiple times. The mental toll of this situation cannot be understated either, because we're not just talking about fight preparation stress here. While Topuria hasn't explicitly used terms like depression or anxiety in his public statements, the language in his announcements paints a picture of significant emotional distress that's clearly affecting him deeply. The burden of protecting his children while combating what he calls manipulated narratives has clearly affected his ability to focus on fighting and training at the level required to be a UFC champion. When asked about his return timeline when reporters pressed him for a specific date, Topuria made it clear that his family comes first, and he has no concrete date for when he'll be back in the octagon.
Actually, I met my wife in Miami.
Really?
Yeah, she was living there.
Damn. Who says you can't meet your wife in Miami?
But you can find your wife in any place in the world.
You hear that? Put that on Only in Date on Instagram. You can meet your wife in Miami.
Alright, that's right.
Put it on Only in Date. It's hilarious.
Everywhere. But why are you saying that?
Huh?
Why?
The situation has drawn comparisons to other UFC fighters who have paused their careers for personal reasons because Topuria isn't the first champion to step away. Sean O'Malley, for instance, announced a break in September 2024, following his title loss to Merab Dvalishvili at UFC 306, citing a need to recharge mentally after an intense run as bantamweight champion, which shows that even elite fighters need time away sometimes. And then there's the Nelk Boys clip that keeps resurfacing in discussions about Topuria's marriage troubles, this awkward interview moment that people keep bringing up. During an interview with the Nelk Boys, Topuria mentioned that he met his wife in Miami, and the Nelk Boys' reaction created an incredibly awkward moment that many now view as foreshadowing of the relationship problems that would come later.
I would bet my life the best case scenario for Ilia Topuria would be 2 more fights, maybe 3. I'd be shocked if we got 3 more fights from Ilia Topuria, unless he were to somehow lose, like a fluke injury or something. If he goes out there, if you fight, let's say Paddy beats Justin Gaethje, I'm predicting Paddy to win right now. So hypothetically, Paddy beats Gaethje, Topuria fights Paddy mid-2026, which is already a disgrace that we got to wait over a year for that fight to happen. Who's he going to fight after that? He's not fighting Arman. Dana White has already made that quite clear. It's already a sham belt. We're not fighting the number 1 contender. Then I think he's going to probably try to get the Islam fight. Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't.
Many have pointed to this awkward exchange as evidence that warning signs about Topuria's relationship may have been visible for some time, that people close to the situation could see this coming, and that the current situation was perhaps inevitable given the circumstances of how they met and the dynamics of their relationship. So where do we go from here? What happens next in this story? The timeline for Topuria's return remains anchored to no activity through Q1 2026, meaning we won't see him until at least April at the earliest, with Q2 starting in April as the earliest realistic window. If his legal resolution delays beyond 12 to 18 months from his June 2025 victory, forced vacancy becomes likely, promoting the interim winner to undisputed status and reshaping contender queues, which would completely change the landscape of the division. The harsh reality is that even in the best-case scenario, even if everything resolves perfectly for Topuria, we're looking at a very limited number of fights remaining in Topuria's MMA career. Probably 2 or 3 fights, maximum. One analyst summed up the situation with a damning assessment that really captures how serious this is.
I'll tell you guys this right now. To quote Dean Thomas, Ilia Topuria is a disaster for the lightweight division. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope something changes.
The bottom line is this, and I want to be clear about what we're witnessing here. We are witnessing what could be the beginning of the end for one of the most talented fighters to ever step into the octagon. A generational talent, potentially walking away in his prime. Whether Topuria emerges from these legal battles vindicated or not, whether he proves his innocence completely, the damage to his career trajectory is undeniable. It's already happened. The lightweight division hangs in limbo in this weird, uncertain state. Contenders are frustrated and don't know what to do, and fans are left wondering if they'll ever see the undefeated champion compete again. If this is really how his story ends, as Topuria himself wrote in his statement, and these are powerful words, the truth does not require volume. It requires facts. Only time will tell what those facts reveal in the courtroom, and in the court of public opinion, and whether Ilia Topuria will ever return to defend the championship he fought so hard to earn, that he sacrificed so much to achieve.